If you feel lost right now, like you woke up one day and realized your life is not where you thought it would be, I want you to listen carefully to this because that feeling is not random. It is not weakness, and it does not mean you are broken. In fact, it is the exact moment where your life can change if you understand what is really happening to you. Most people think feeling lost means they have failed. I used to believe that too. But after more than a decade in special operations, after combat deployments where hesitation could get people killed, I learned something most civilians never get taught. Feeling lost is not the problem. Staying lost is. Here is the dangerous part no one warns you about. When you feel lost, your brain starts searching for comfort instead of direction. You scroll more, you distract yourself, you wait for motivation, and slowly, without realizing it, you train your mind to accept confusion as normal. According to military psychology training we used in special forces, prolonged indecision creates learned helplessness. That is a state where capable people stop trusting themselves, not because they cannot act, but because they stopped believing action matters. That is how good people drift into lives they never chose. Now, here is the hope, and this is important. The same research shows that clarity does not come before action, it comes after it. In elite units, we never waited until we felt ready. We moved first, then adjusted. That is why the title of this video is true. If you feel lost, this is how you turn your life around, not by finding yourself, but by rebuilding yourself. Most people make the same mistake at this stage. They think they need a big answer, a new purpose, a perfect plan. They sit there asking, what should I do with my life? That question feels deep, but it is actually a trap. It keeps you frozen. Researchers studying decision paralysis found that the more options people consider, the less likely they are to move at all. You do not need a life plan. You need a starting point. In BUDS training, when things got brutal and guys were breaking, instructors did not ask us about our dreams. They gave us one simple instruction. What is the next task? Not the whole day, not the finish line, the next task. That single shift in focus is what pulls people out of the void. Here is the small secret most people never hear. Feeling lost is often a sign that your old identity no longer fits, and that is painful, but it is also powerful. According to behavioral research, identity crisis often precedes major positive transformation. In other words, before people level up, their old life starts to feel wrong. That discomfort is not your enemy, it is your signal. The danger is ignoring it. The solution is using it. You do not need motivation to start. Motivation is unreliable. In combat, motivation disappears fast. What remains is structure, simple rules, non-negotiable actions. When you create structure, even small structure, your nervous system calms down. Your confidence starts to rebuild. You stop feeling lost because you are moving again. Let me be clear. If you do nothing, this feeling will not fade. It will harden. It will turn into regret. I have seen it happen to strong men and women. But if you take control of one small action today, something strange happens. Your mind starts to follow your body, not the other way around. This is not a motivational speech. I am not here to hype you up. I am here to tell you the truth. Feeling lost means your current path is no longer acceptable to your deeper self. That is not failure. That is awareness. And awareness is the first step to rebuilding your life in 2025 and beyond. In the next part, I am going to explain why staying comfortably lost is more dangerous than outright failure and why most people never escape it once they settle in. Most people do not realize when they cross the line from being temporarily lost to being comfortably lost. That is the most dangerous place a human being can exist. Not because life is falling apart, but because it is just tolerable enough to keep you from changing. You still function, you still show up, you still pay your bills, but inside, something is slowly shutting down. This is where fear quietly takes over. When you stay in this state too long, your brain adapts to it. According to neuroscience research on habit formation and decision making, the brain is incredibly efficient at normalizing repeated behavior, even when that behavior is damaging. Indecision becomes routine, delay becomes automatic, and over time, your nervous system starts treating inaction as safety. That is how people with massive potential wake up 10 years later asking where the time went. Here is the real danger. When you remain comfortably lost, you stop feeling the urgency to move. The pain is dull, not sharp. There is no crisis forcing your hand. And because there is no external threat, you convince yourself that you still have time. In special operations, we learned early that the absence of chaos does not mean the absence of danger. Some of the most catastrophic failures happen during quiet moments when people assume nothing is wrong. Researchers studying long-term regret found something brutal but honest. People rarely regret failing at something they tried. They regret the things they never acted on. That regret does not arrive all at once. It accumulates slowly, year by year, decision by decision, until confidence erodes and self-respect follows. Now, here is the hope, because there is always a way out if you catch it early. The brain that adapted to inaction can adapt back to action. Neuroplasticity works both ways. Studies on behavioral change show that small, consistent actions rebuild self-trust faster than big emotional breakthroughs. You do not need to overhaul your life. You need to interrupt the pattern. Most people still make the wrong move here. They wait for the discomfort to get worse, thinking pain will force change. That is a mistake. Pain does not create discipline. Structure does. When pain finally becomes unbearable, people panic. They quit jobs impulsively. They chase extreme solutions. They burn bridges. That is not transformation. That is escape. In elite units, we never waited for conditions to feel right. We created pressure on purpose. Controlled pressure. That is the difference. According to performance research used by military and emergency responders, voluntary stress builds resilience. Avoided stress builds anxiety. If you avoid discomfort now, it will return later with interest. Here is the small secret that actually works. You must make staying the same more uncomfortable than changing. Not emotionally, but practically. One rule, one standard, one daily action you do, whether you feel like it or not. When you do this, something shifts internally. Your identity begins to change from someone who is stuck to someone who acts. I have seen this with guys who thought they were done. Men who believed their best years were behind them. Once they started honoring one small commitment daily, their posture changed. Their voice changed. Their thinking changed. Confidence did not come from affirmations. It came from evidence. Comfortably lost people avoid accountability. That is another trap. According to behavioral psychology, accountability triggers follow-through far more effectively than willpower. That is why elite teams operate in tight units. Someone is always watching. Someone always knows if you show up or not. When you remove accountability, excuses multiply. If you are listening to this and thinking, this sounds like me, that is not a reason to feel ashamed. It is a reason to act now. The longer you stay in this state, the more effort it takes to climb out. But the moment you decide that comfort is no longer acceptable, momentum starts building. Understand this. Being lost is not the enemy. Accepting it as your identity is. The goal is not to feel inspired. The goal is to feel responsible again. Responsibility brings direction. Direction brings momentum. And momentum brings you back to life. In the next part, I'm going to explain why motivation is a trap, why it fails when you need it most, and how discipline, when used correctly, can pull you out of even the deepest rut. Most people are taught that motivation is the engine of change, that if they could just feel inspired enough, disciplined enough, excited enough, their life would finally move forward. That belief sounds good, but it is wrong. And it is one of the main reasons people stay stuck longer than they should. Motivation is emotional. Emotions are unstable, and instability is deadly when pressure shows up. In special operations, we learned very quickly that motivation disappears the moment conditions turn hostile. Cold, exhaustion, fear, uncertainty, none of those care how motivated you felt the night before. That is why elite units never build systems around motivation. We build systems around discipline. According to performance psychology used in military and emergency response training, disciplined behavior outperforms motivated behavior under stress every single time. Here is the fear most people do not want to face. If your progress depends on how you feel, you will always lose. Life will outlast your enthusiasm. Now, here is the hope. Discipline is not about willpower. That is the part most people get wrong. Willpower drains. Discipline simplifies. It removes decision-making. When you do not have to decide whether to act, you conserve mental energy. Research on decision fatigue shows that the more choices you make in a day, the worse your decisions become. Discipline eliminates that problem. Most people still fall into the same trap. They wait until they feel ready. They tell themselves, I will start when I feel motivated. That moment rarely comes. And if it does, it disappears the first time resistance shows up. This is why gyms are full in January and empty in February. Motivation creates spikes. Discipline creates systems. Here is the small secret that actually works. You do not need more discipline across your entire life. You need discipline in one place, one non-negotiable action that happens daily. When you anchor your identity to that action, everything else begins to organize around it. According to behavioral science, habits tied to identity are significantly more durable than habits tied to outcomes. When you see yourself as someone who does not miss, your behavior follows. That is why in training, we never said, try your best. We said, this is the standard. Standards do not care how you feel. There is something else most people misunderstand. Discipline is not punishment, it is protection. It protects you from your weaker moments. It protects you from your excuses. It protects your future self from decisions made in comfort. When you lack discipline, your emotions take command, and emotions under pressure will always choose the path of least resistance. I have watched talented people sabotage themselves because they thought discipline would make life miserable. What actually made them miserable was inconsistency, starting and stopping, promising and quitting. That cycle destroys self-trust. And once self-trust is gone, confidence collapses. Here is where hope returns. Self-trust can be rebuilt fast. Every time you keep a small promise to yourself, your brain records it. According to neurological studies on self-efficacy, repeated follow-through strengthens the belief that you are capable. That belief is more powerful than motivation, but you have to be strategic. Most people try to overhaul everything at once. New routines, new goals, new habits. That is a mistake. In elite training, overload causes failure. Precision creates progress. One action, same time, same conditions, every day. That is how discipline is installed. Once discipline is in place, something surprising happens. Motivation starts showing up after the action, not before it. Confidence begins to grow. Clarity improves. You stop asking what you should do with your life and start focusing on what you are doing today. This is the shift that pulls people out of stagnation. Not inspiration, but execution. Not hype, but standards. Not feelings, but follow through. In the next part, I am going to explain the 40% rule most people misunderstand, why your mind lies to you at the moment you want to quit, and how to use that knowledge without burning yourself out. There is a moment in every difficult process where your mind tells you that you are done, not tired, not uncomfortable. Done. It says you have reached your limit, that there is nothing left. Most people believe that voice. And the moment they do, progress stops. That is where potential dies. In Buddhist training, we met that moment daily. Cold water, exhaustion, pain, sleep deprivation. The conditions were designed to push you to what felt like the edge. And that is where one of the most important lessons of my life was burned into me. When your mind says you are finished, you are not empty. You are not broken. You are usually operating at about 40% of your actual capacity. That is the 40% rule, and most people misunderstand it. The fear part is this. Your brain is wired to protect you, not to help you grow. According to neurological research on effort perception, the brain sends fatigue signals early to preserve energy. It does not measure your true capacity. It estimates risk. When you are doing something unfamiliar or uncomfortable, your brain assumes danger and tries to shut you down early. This is why people quit right before change happens. Here is the hope. That signal is not truth. It is a suggestion. And once you learn to recognize it, you gain control over it. Special forces training is not about ignoring pain. It is about interpreting it correctly. There is a difference between injury and discomfort. Most civilians treat discomfort as a stop sign. We treated it as a checkpoint. Most people make a dangerous mistake with the 40% rule. They think it means pushing harder at all costs, grinding endlessly, destroying their body and mind. That is not what it means. That approach leads to burnout, resentment, and collapse. I have seen people ruin themselves chasing toughness without strategy. The real secret is controlled extension. When your mind says stop, you do not sprint forward blindly. You take one more deliberate step, one more repetition, one more minute. That is how capacity expands. According to performance research in endurance and military training, gradual exposure to controlled stress increases resilience without damaging recovery. This applies directly to your life. When you feel lost, you hit mental resistance faster than physical resistance. You start a habit, you feel good for a few days, then resistance shows up. Doubt, boredom, fatigue. That is the moment most people quit. Not because the habit is wrong, but because their brain is uncomfortable with change. Here is the small trick that works. When resistance hits, do not ask how far you have to go. Ask how small you can make the next step. The brain handles small extensions better than big commitments. That is why elite training breaks impossible tasks into manageable actions. There is another layer most people miss. Confidence does not come from success. It comes from surviving discomfort. According to psychological studies on resilience, individuals who repeatedly face and overcome controlled stress develop higher confidence than those who avoid stress altogether. That means every time you push slightly past your comfort zone, you are not just making progress, you are rewiring your self image, but you must do it intelligently. Random suffering does not build strength. Purposeful stress does. This is where people fail. They confuse pain with progress. In reality, progress comes from structure. You decide in advance what one more looks like. You do not negotiate in the moment. Negotiation is where the mind wins. The fear is real. If you keep obeying the quit signal, it gets louder. Each time you stop when it tells you to, the brain learns that quitting works. According to habit research, behaviors that relieve discomfort are reinforced. That is why quitting becomes easier every time. The hope is even stronger. Once you push past that signal consistently, the brain recalibrates. What once felt unbearable becomes normal. That is not motivation, that is adaptation. This rule is not about being extreme, it is about being honest. Honest about how often you quit early, honest about how much more you could do with structure, honest about the fact that your limits are not fixed. In the next part, I am going to explain why goals alone will not save you, why identity is the real battlefield, and how changing who you believe you are can permanently lock in this progress instead of resetting every few months. Most people believe their problem is a lack of goals. They think if they could just find the right target, everything would fall into place. A better career, a better body, a better life. But goals are not the foundation of change. They are the result of something deeper. And if that deeper layer stays the same, no goal will ever hold. That deeper layer is identity. Here is the fear most people never confront. You will never consistently act in a way that conflicts with how you see yourself. You can force it for a while, but eventually your behavior will snap back to match your identity. According to behavioral psychology, identity-based beliefs are one of the strongest predictors of long-term behavior. That is why people hit the same patterns year after year, even after setting new goals. I saw this clearly in training. Two guys could have the same physical ability, the same instructions, the same pressure. One would rise, the other would break. The difference was not talent, it was identity. One saw himself as someone who finishes, the other saw himself as someone who tries. Here is the hope. Identity is not fixed, it is built. And more importantly, it is built through action, not affirmations. Telling yourself you are disciplined does nothing. Acting in a disciplined way, even when it is uncomfortable, changes how you see yourself. According to research on self-perception theory, people infer who they are by observing what they repeatedly do. Your brain watches your behavior and draws conclusions. Most people make the same mistake when trying to change their identity. They visualize the future version of themselves and wait to feel like that person before acting. That never works. The identity you want is on the other side of behavior, not before it. In special operations, we did not wait to feel like elite operators. We earned that identity by meeting standards daily. Here is the small secret that locks this in. You do not change your identity by doing big, heroic acts. You change it by keeping small promises consistently. Each time you do what you said you would do, even when no one is watching, your brain updates your self-image. You go from I am trying to I am someone who follows through. There is another danger people overlook. If you tie your identity to outcomes, you become fragile. If the outcome does not happen fast enough, confidence collapses. That is why identity must be tied to process. Not I am successful, but I am someone who executes daily. That identity survives failure. It survives slow progress. It survives doubt. According to studies on resilience and long-term performance, individuals who define themselves by effort and consistency outperform those who define themselves by results. That is not motivational talk. That is data. Process-based identity creates stability. Stability creates momentum. Most people avoid this work because it is quiet. There is no applause, no instant feedback. But this is where real transformation happens. When you stop asking, is this working yet? And start asking, did I honor the standard today? Your life starts to reorganize itself. The fear is this: if you do not consciously build your identity, your environment will do it for you. Comfort will define you. Distraction will define you. Avoidance will define you. That identity feels safe, but it slowly erodes self-respect. And without self-respect, nothing sustainable grows. The hope is simple and brutal. You get to choose a new identity through action, not someday, today, one standard, one rule, one commitment you keep regardless of mood. Over time, that standard becomes who you are. And once identity changes, behavior no longer requires force. It becomes natural. This is why some people seem unstoppable, not because they are special, but because their identity is aligned with their actions. They do not rely on motivation. They rely on who they believe they are. In the next part, I'm going to give you the single rule we use to operate under chaos, the rule that prevents overwhelm, and the rule that can turn confusion into direction when everything feels uncertain. Chaos is not the exception in life, it is the default. Most people wait for calm before they act, but calm rarely stays long enough. That is why so many people feel overwhelmed, scattered, and stuck. They are trying to plan their entire future while standing in the middle of uncertainty. That approach guarantees paralysis. In special operations, chaos was constant, information was incomplete, conditions changed fast, pressure never stopped. If we waited to feel ready or certain, nothing would get done. So we operated under a single rule that kept us moving no matter how loud the noise became. Execute the next mission. That rule sounds simple, but it is powerful. Here is the fear people need to understand. Overwhelm does not come from having too much to do. It comes from trying to hold too much in your mind at once. According to cognitive load research, the human brain can only process a limited amount of information before performance collapses. When you try to solve your entire life at once, your brain shuts down. That is why people scroll, distract themselves, or avoid decisions. It is not laziness, it is overload. Now, here is the hope. You do not need to know the whole plan, you only need to know the next mission. In high risk environments, we never focused on the entire operation at once. We broke it down into immediate objectives: complete this task, secure this area, move to the next point. Once that was done, clarity improved, information updated, confidence increased. Most people make the same mistake here. They try to fix everything at once: health, money, relationships, purpose. That creates pressure with no direction. Pressure without direction leads to panic. Panic leads to inaction. According to behavioral studies, people are far more likely to follow through when tasks are clearly defined and limited in scope. Here is the small secret that works. Define your next mission so small it cannot fail. Not what you want your life to look like in 5 years, not even in 1 year. What is the one action today that moves you forward and reinforces your new identity? When you complete it, you do not celebrate emotionally, you log it. Evidence matters more than feelings. This rule also protects you from another danger: emotional decision making. When life gets stressful, emotions spike. If your actions depend on how you feel, chaos wins. But when you have a predefined mission, you act regardless of mood. That is how elite teams stay effective under pressure. According to leadership research in military and emergency response units, simple rules outperform complex plans in unpredictable environments. Complexity collapses under stress. Simplicity survives. That is why this rule works not just in combat, but in everyday life. There is a deeper layer to this. Executing the next mission restores trust in yourself. Every completed action sends a signal to your brain that you are capable. That signal compounds. Over time, the feeling of being lost is replaced by a sense of direction, not because everything is solved, but because you are moving. The fear is what happens if you ignore this. If you keep waiting for clarity, chaos will define you. If you keep reacting instead of executing, life will always feel like it is happening to you instead of being shaped by you. That is a hard place to live. The hope is that direction is not something you find. It is something you create through movement. Once you commit to executing the next mission daily, your life stabilizes, confidence grows, options expand. You stop feeling trapped because you are no longer standing still. Let me be clear about something. This is not about perfection. You will miss days. You will fail at times. That does not matter. What matters is returning to the rule. What is the next mission? That question cuts through noise, fear, and doubt. If you feel lost right now, this is how you turn your life around. Not by waiting for motivation, not by chasing clarity, but by executing one mission at a time with discipline and intent. That is how we operated under chaos. And it works just as well in civilian life. You do not need a new life. You need a standard. Set the mission, execute, then set the next one. That is how momentum is built, and momentum changes everything.